Okay, so I have been talking about doing an album review slash album reviews of my recently purchased albums, and today I decided I will actually give a mini reviews of each of my new albums. I'm not going to do a in-depth album review of one album like I have made in the past in my channel. So this time this will be a much shorter reviews of each album, because I have 5 albums to cover now and give you my review. So, but still this could end up quite long video, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, so the albums I'm going to review today are Fear Factory Recoded. So this is a remix album of Aggression Continuum, their newest full-length album, and this is a kind of sequel to 96 Remanufacture, which was a remix album of Demanufacture, one of their best known albums, released in 95. So I will be reviewing this. Also Bloodbath's newest album, Survival of the Sickest, Swedish death metal, old school death metal. So yeah, I will be reviewing this. And Memoriam newest Rise to Power, UK death metal kind of super group, could you say. Also, of course, Bloodbath is a super group containing some members of Catatonia, Opeth, Paradise Lost. But yeah, Memoriam UK death metal super group, consisting of the original vocalist of Ball Thrower, band that ended their career in 2000 and, well, I can't remember. Their last album was 2005, those ones Loyal. But this is kind of built from the ashes of Ball Thrower, and this has a very similar sound to Ball Thrower. So be reviewing that. And also I very recently got into actually, to me, it's a kind of new band, but the band itself is really old. They were founded in late 70s, but I just recently got into this band. Of course, I have known this band for quite a long time, but yeah. So we are talking about Killing Joke. They have so many albums, and I like to have all the albums of the bands that I really love. But in this case, I decided to get their singles collection, consisting of singles from 1979 to 2012. So this covers like more than 30 years of their careers. and this is a collection of their singles. So in other words, a collection of their best known tracks. So yeah, I really don't like reviewing collections. I like to review full-length albums. It's quite, it's much harder to actually review the best of. This is a kind of best of album than some full-length album. But anyway, I also got their newest album. So this covers from the beginning of their career to 2012. But this album is their newest, Killing Joke Pylon, released in 2015. And an excellent album. So this collection doesn't have any tracks from this naturally, because this is newer, 3 years newer than when this was released. But I will be, so I'm not going to, review this actually, but I'm definitely going to review this. But yeah, actually, let's start talking about this a little bit. So, and a little bit about the history of the band. So the band was founded in late 70s, and they began with the post-punk band in the early 80s, but shifted to new wave, kind of more new wave style in the mid 80s. And of course, if you know about 80s music, new wave was a really, really big thing in the mid 80s especially. But then in the early 90s, they began to implement much more heavier style. So they began a kind of industrial rock, industrial metal band in the 90s, and they have pretty much continued that route to the early 2000s and to all the way to this day. They are, it's very hard to categorize their style, but I would say they are kind of industrial rock / metal / punk, but definitely an industrial kind of sound they have. So yeah, I'm not going to really much talk about these tracks, but this is a 2-disc collection. So the first disc contains singles from 79 to 1988, so about 10 years, and it has 17 tracks on the disc 1, and disc 2 is from 1990 to 2012, so that is much more wider. It is about 2 decades covers their music, and it's much more heavier. The disc 2 is, of course, like I said, they began implementing heavier sound in the 90s. So the disc 2 is much heavier, and disc 1 is more post-punk and new wave. So yeah, an excellent collection, and it was dirty cheap, only 10 euros, so I had to get it. But then Pylon, their newest album, not so new anymore, already 8 years old, so this was released, like I said, 2015. It pretty much continues their industrial rock, industrial punk, little bit industrial metal, heavier sound, and they have, done that, been making that kind of music for quite a while now. Well, actually about 3 decades. But this is just a masterpiece. Like, I'm going to tell you my favorite tracks. So this album have 10 tracks. It's very varied album. There is something for everyone. Heavier industrial metal tracks, little more punky tracks, and some are, I would say, much more, alternative rock or something. Like I said, it's very hard to categorize their style. It's all over the place, and I love it. But yeah, my favorite tracks, actually, most of the tracks of the whole album, 10 tracks, most of them are my favorites. It's really hard to pick up just a few favorites, but let's say the second track, Dawn of the Hive, it's the album's maybe heaviest song, really catchy, and I especially love the riffs all over this album. Like, everything is cool. Bass is very present, it's very punchy. I always love bass when it's very punchy and very audible. Then I would say fourth track, Euphoria. It's that track is very beautiful, very melodic, not so heavy, not that heavy like the second track, but it's really melodic, really catchy, like vocal melodies. Then I would say the seventh track, Big Boss. It's kind of more mellow tracks. It's not so heavy. It's much more, just beautiful, melancholic track. Then the 8th track, Delete. That's also one of the, I would say, heavier songs on the album, but not as heavy as the second track, Dawn of the Hive. And then I would say my maybe among the top 3 tracks on this album is the last one, Into the Unknown. It's again very melodic, very catchy melodies, riffs, and also I would have to say that the drumming on this album is really, really good. And they have the original lineup, and they've had the original lineup since 2010 or something. But yeah, I fucking love this album. It's just amazing. So I would give this album 10 minus out of 10. So it's that good. It's almost perfect. A true masterpiece. And I really can't wait for their new album, which I have heard that it might be coming this year or next year, but we don't have to wait for that long, because yeah, it's already been 8 years since this. Then Memoriam, Rise to Power, so the UK death metal supergroup. This is their, I think, 5th album already in a very short period of time. I think their first album was released in 2015 or 2016. So they have made almost one album per year, or I would say the average of one album per 1.5 years. But they just keep getting better. I mean, each album they release, they get better. So the first album was okay, the second was somewhat better, the third one was definitely much better, the fourth one was even better, and I would say this newest album might be their best album, or the third one, or the fourth. I would say the first two albums were much, they were okay, they were good, but from the third album to this newest album, so the third, fourth and fifth album are definitely my favorites. I really can't decide which one is my favorite. Like I said, they have improved, on every album, but it's still, it doesn't mean automatically that it's my favorite album. But yeah, this is just an pure old school death metal, very melodic. So the melodic thing, so with each album they have gotten more melodic, definitely. So I would say this is their most melodic album. Comparing to their first two albums, they were much more, not so melodic, more about just, attitude of death metal, and maybe I would say a thrashier side of death metal, the first two albums. But yeah, you could categorize this as a melodic death metal album almost, but definitely old school sounding, the 90s, early 90s to mid 90s sounding death metal, even though this is this year's album, so this is all new, was released just a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, and also I fucking love the art style. It's just amazing art style. so with each album they have the same artist doing their album covers, and they are just fantastic. But yeah, there are 8 tracks on the album, and I would pick up as my favorite tracks the second track, Total War. It's really a banger, really aggressive, but also a very, very pole thrower sounding. There are definitely some familiar sounding pole thrower riffs on this track. Then I would say the 6th track, All Is Lost. It's one of their music video tracks. It might actually be my favorite track. Really has it's like an all-around song. It has many parts of, different parts of death metal styles. It has a kind of more slower, doomish ending of the song, and then there are kind of blackened death metal, a kind of black metal style of riffing in the middle, and I actually absolutely love that part. But yeah, it has some thrash elements, so it's very all-around song. And then Rise to Power, the 7th track, their title track. It's a very epic song, very melodic yet very heavy song, and yeah, I would say those 3 are my favorite tracks. And the last track is also This Pain. It starts with the acoustic intro. It's I think longest track, and it's kind of would you say half ballad? You can't really say that there are ballads in death metal, but it's definitely there less heavier songs, or the least heavy song on this album, and I would give this album 9- out of 10. But yeah, this or the 3rd or 4th album is my favorite. I really can't decide. They are so equal. Okay, and next, Bloodbath, Survival of the Sickest. So yeah, like I said, this is a Swedish death metal supergroup containing of 2 members of Catatonia, a really well-known metal band from Sweden. Their bassist and vocalist and also their guitarist is in this band. Also, the drummer of Opeth is in Bloodbath, and I really don't know the second guitarist where he's from, but Nick Holmes, the vocalist, is from Paradise Lost, the UK doom / death metal. I would say nowadays it's gothic / doom metal band. But I might be wrong. That's just my opinion. but yeah, From Paradise Lost, Nick Holmes. And this is really, really, really old school death metal, Swedish sounding, of course. And, you know, one of their reasons why they were founded in late 90s were that they wanted to, you know, make an homage of early legendary Swedish death metal bands like Entombed, At the Gates, In Flames, Dark Tranquility, and bands like that. And to this day they have kept and will be keeping their old school death metal sound. But I still think that their early albums from early 2000 to, you know, to 2010 or something, between that they have made their best albums. But this is definitely better album than their, you know, album that came before this, The Arrow of Satan is Drawn. I think that's their weakest album. So I'm happy to say that this is definitely better album all the way than the last album. So I was kind of worried, you know, after they released The Arrow of Satan is Drawn, because it's, you know, kind of stale album. It doesn't have any highlights, pretty much. It doesn't have those standout tracks, but this definitely has some standout tracks. It has 11 tracks, and my favorites, I would say, are third song, Dead Parade. And, you know, I haven't really listened to this album that many times, so I really can't remember that well about each of the tracks. But I remember that much, that it was one of my favorite tracks, the third one. And also the fourth one next, Malignant Maggot Therapy. It's one of the fastest songs, definitely a absolute fucking blast. Has quite a much of blast beats, because, you know, their last album, The Arrow of Satan is Drawn, it was much more slowed down. It still had some fast songs, but their earlier material was much faster than their two newest albums. But yeah, the fourth track is definitely, I would say, the fastest song probably on this album. Then Born Infernal, not porn, Born Infernal is also one of my favorite tracks. I remember it having some fucking sick riffing, some very memorable and catchy riffs. And then next I would say Affliction to Extinction, the 8th track. And then I would say the 10th track, Environside, would be my last pick for my favorite tracks on the album. And also the last track is, I would say, very different, very slow, heavy song. It has some gothic elements, like I think the last track might quite heavily have to do with Nick Holmes' ideas, because it sounds quite partly like Paradise Lost, so it has some gothic doom style, the last track, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. But yeah, definitely better album in every way than the last album. So I would give this album 8.5 out of 10. But yeah, it's just not as good as their early material, like Nightmares Made Flesh, their second album, or The Fathomless Mastery, their third album. I think those two are my favorites. But yeah, definitely, unfortunately, better than the last album. So I still have some hope for this band's future with this release. And the last one, Fear Factory's Recoded. So like I said, this is a very anticipated, and it this is a sequel to their 96 remanufacture remix album from, like I said, demanufacture their 95 album. So a long way that remix album. We just had to wait for, let me see, for 27 years for their next remix album. And yeah, this is a remix album, again, like I said, from their last album, Aggression Continuum, which is a fucking awesome album, and this is not an exception. This is a fantastic remix album of their newest album. Really varied. It has, many styles of electronic music present in this album. It has some heavier industrial metal, of course. Well, their main genre is industrial metal, but more industrial, more electronic, of course, sounding industrial metal tracks. It even has one track that is a 80s synthwave style of track, which I love. It's one of my favorites. And some, darkcore, the more darker, more sinister sounding electronic style of track. And yeah, everything in between pretty much. Also some, I wouldn't say big beat, but maybe similar to that, or some trance elements also, which I love. Trance is my favorite subgenre of electronic music, definitely. I love trance. So yeah, I'm really happy about this. It's definitely, well, is any album worth almost 30 years of waiting? That is debatable, but well, it's very good. still. And it has 11 tracks, and I would say my favorites are, well, the first track, Adapt or Die, is just an, spoken intro, so it's not a song exactly. But Hatred Will Prevail, the first actual song, and the second track is definitely one of my favorites. Then the fourth one, I Am the Night. No, it wasn't the synthwave, sorry. I remember the fourth track was the synthwave track, but still I like it, the fourth one, I Am the Night Rider, which is a remix of Fuel Injected Suicide Machine. And also the second track, which was one of my favorites, is a remix of Monolith from the Aggression Continuum. So I will say, mention what remixes they are from the, Aggression Continuum, their original tracks. Then the sixth song, Worthless, which was the synthwave 80s style track, and it's the remix of End of Line. Then I would say Empires Fall, it's the heaviest song, the most metal sounding song of this album, of these remixes. It's the remix of Collapse, which was in Aggression Continuum their heaviest song, like really crushing. Actually, it's one of their heaviest songs in their whole career, the Collapse from the last album. So definitely this remix has the same aggression and heaviness of the original song. Then System Assassin, which is the remix of Aggression Continuum, their title track. It's definitely one of my favorites. Really aggressive. Well, Aggression Continuum, aggressive. Then I would say Hypocrisy of Faith, which is a remix of Manufactured Hope. Really good, really good. Among, I would say, my top 5 tracks. But then maybe my favorite could be the last, which is a Recoded, the title track of this remix album. And Recoded is of course a remix of Recode from the Aggression Continuum. That last track is very dark, very sinister. Like I mentioned, that track is like a darkcore kind of track. It's a really, really menacing, sinister, dark sounding, kind of sluggish track. Very slow, very, very heavy atmosphere. It's not about, the beats like many of, of these albums track. And overall in electronic music, it's not about the rhythm and beats. It's much more about just the, just the atmosphere, the dark, sinister atmosphere. It's definitely my favorite, the last one. So, is this better than Remanufacture from 96? Well, that album, that remix album is insanely good, except some few tracks that are just okay. But most of the songs on that album is just, they are phenomenal. I would say this is maybe not as good as Remanufacture, but definitely a very good remix album and worth successor to Remanufacture. And I would give this album an 8+ out of 10, yes, whereas the Remanufacture would be 9 out of 10, I would say, or 9- out of 10. But yeah, this was my last reviewed album. Whew, about 40 minutes, but I think this went quite nicely. Not as long as I feared this could be, but yeah, I just decided that I would not be making a separate, reviews of each of these albums. It would just be too much of the work. Maybe I'm just a little lazy that I wanted to, review these in one video, but there you go, I've done it. And yeah, like you said, so very varied albums, all kinds of styles, death metal. Of course, there was 2 death metal albums, Bloodbath and Memoriam, but one a remix album, then industrial rock, punk, metal. So yeah, I listen to many kinds of metal and rock. I'm not a punk dude by any means, so the Killing Joke's early material is not my style, but definitely I love their 19s and 2000 stuff much more, their heavier industrial style of music. Anyway, that's it. Also, speaking of industrial, I have my Godflesh t-shirt and also Godflesh hoodie. So double fan service for the awesome legendary Godflesh, which, by the way, their new album should be coming maybe this year, but that's for another story. And I'm going to wrap up this now, so see you in the next video. Again, whatever it is, what I come up with. Anyway, bye.